I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it might be the wind brushing against the windows or the old farmhouse creaking in the night. But as my mind cleared, I realized it was a voice low, urgent, and close. I slipped quietly from bed, heart pounding, and crept toward the door. The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. Moonlight spilled across the floor, just enough to reveal Robert, my husband of 27 years, standing at the end of the hallway. He didn't see me. His back was turned, and his phone was pressed tightly to his ear. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he whispered. I froze. His words sliced through the stillness like a blade. What didn't I suspect? And why did he sound so confident? As I stood there, hidden in the shadows, one terrifying question rooted itself deep in my mind. Was the man I trusted with my life now plotting against me? The next morning, the kitchen filled with sunlight, but it couldn't chase away the heavy feeling that settled over me. Robert was already there, whistling softly as he sipped his coffee. He looked so ordinary, so familiar, like the man I had loved for nearly 3 decades. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, flashing a warm smile. I forced my lips into a smile of my own. "Morning," I replied, my voice thin and strained. He chatted easily about the weather and small-town news, moving around the kitchen like everything was fine. But inside, my heart was pounding. I couldn't forget what I had heard. Had I imagined it? Was I overthinking? Or was I living with a man who was hiding something from me? Later that day, after Robert headed outside to fix a fence, I sat down with my laptop. Normally, he handled most of the household finances, but today, something pushed me to look for myself. As I pulled up our joint accounts, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Small withdrawals, $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000, appeared over the past few months. Always small enough to slip by unnoticed if you weren't looking. But I was looking now. Grabbing a pen, I began scribbling down the transactions. My hand trembled slightly. Each withdrawal felt like another thread unraveling the life we had built together. The screen door creaked behind me. Startled, I slammed the laptop shut just as Robert stepped inside, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. He wiped his boots on the mat and gave me a quick, curious look. "You okay, honey?" he asked, his voice filled with practiced concern. I forced a calm smile. "Just checking emails," I said, steadying my voice. He nodded, lingering for a moment before turning toward the fridge. I watched him move, and a chill swept through me. How long had this been happening? How long had he been plotting behind my back, while smiling at me across the dinner table? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, his words looping endlessly through my mind. "She doesn't suspect anything yet." But he was wrong. I did suspect something now. And whatever Robert was hiding, I would find it, no matter how deep he had buried it. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the kitchen, but it couldn't chase away the cold knot of dread twisting in my stomach. Robert was already there, humming a tune I didn't recognize, as he poured steaming coffee into his favorite chip mug, the one I bought him on our 10th anniversary. He looked up and smiled. So casual, so comfortable, as if the night before had never happened. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice as warm and easy as ever. But to me, it sounded hollow, rehearsed, almost cruel. I managed a tight smile in return, my heart pounding against my ribs, so hard it hurt. As he talked about the weather and the neighbors, about the upcoming county fair, and needing to pick up more feed for the horses, I nodded along, pretending to listen, while every fiber of my being screamed that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I stared at the man across the table from me, the man I had trusted with every part of my life, and for the first time, I saw a stranger. After breakfast, when he stepped outside to check the fences, I stayed behind, trembling fingers opening my laptop with a silent prayer that I was wrong, that the fear gnawing at me was just an overreaction. But as I pulled up our bank accounts, my breath caught in my throat. The screen was filled with transaction after transaction. $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000. money siphoned away little by little. Month after month, hidden just well enough to escape notice unless you were looking closely. My hands shook as I scribbled the amounts down on a notepad, each figure feeling like a slap across the face. I thought about every overtime shift I worked, every holiday we spent scrimping to pay bills, every dream we shelved to save for the future that apparently he had been quietly tearing apart behind my back. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away, rage burning hotter than grief now. The screen door banged shut behind me, and I barely had time to slam the laptop closed before Robert strode back into the kitchen, wiping sweat from his brow. "You okay, honey?" he asked. His voice dipped in fake concern, his eyes sharp, searching. I pasted a smile onto my face and forced my voice to sound steady. "Just checking emails," I said, willing myself to act normal even as my heart felt like it might shatter inside my chest. He nodded, too quickly, too casually, and turned to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. I watched him with a tightness in my chest that I couldn't put into words. How many nights had he kissed me goodnight, whispered he loved me, while scheming to tear my life apart? How many smiles had been lies? That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I stared up at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, feeling like a fool. Robert slept peacefully, his breathing even and deep, as if he had not a care in the world. Meanwhile, I lay there with my heart splintering, with my mind racing through every moment that now looked different under this brutal new light. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he had said. Those words echoed in my ears, louder than the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, louder than the distant sound of coyotes calling from the woods. He thought I was blind, thought I was naive. Maybe for a while I had been. Maybe I had loved him so much that I ignored the little things, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden bursts of anger. But not anymore. I knew now. I saw him clearly for the first time. And whatever he was planning, whatever betrayal he thought he could pull off, I vowed silently that night, lying in the darkness with tears drying on my cheeks. I would not let him win. I would find out everything. I would protect what was mine. And when the time came, I would make sure he understood just how wrong he had been to underestimate me. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, spilling golden light across the worn wooden floors, but it couldn't touch the deep chill that had taken root inside me. Robert was already there, leaning against the counter, humming softly as he sipped his coffee, wearing that easy, familiar smile that once made me feel so safe. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, like everything was fine, like he hadn't shattered my trust in a whisper while the rest of the world slept. I mumbled a greeting back, forcing my lips to stretch into something that resembled a smile. But my heart was hammering inside my chest, my mind spinning with the memory of a secret conversation. As he chatted about the weather, about the neighbor's new dog, about absolutely nothing that mattered, I nodded along, feeling the distance between us growing wider with every word he spoke. How many lies had he fed me with that same calm, charming voice? How many promises had already crumbled behind my back? I could barely choke down my coffee, my hands trembling as I clutched the mug, desperate to hide the way my world was crumbling quietly under the surface. When he left to repair the broken gate out by the pasture, I seized the moment. Heart pounding, I pulled out my laptop, hands clumsy with nerves, and logged into our joint bank accounts. We had always kept separate savings, only merging enough to cover household expenses. But now, as the numbers flickered on the screen, dread twisted my stomach into knots. Withdrawal after withdrawal jumped out at me. $500, $1,200, $750, $2, 000, small enough to avoid notice individually, but together they painted a devastating picture. Dozens of transactions over the last few months, thousands of dollars slipping away behind my back. Each transfer a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. My fingers shook as I scribbled down the dates and amounts, my heart breaking all over again with every line I wrote. Memories flashed through my mind. Long nights working overtime to pay off the mortgage early, skipped vacations to save for retirement, holidays spent cutting corners just to build a future we thought we could count on. Now, it seemed, Robert had been quietly dismantling that future dollar by stolen dollar. I felt the sting of tears, but blinked them away furiously, rage and heartbreak battling for space inside my chest. The screen door banged open, and I barely had time to close the laptop before Robert strolled back into the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes flicked toward the table where my laptop sat closed, but if he suspected anything, he didn't show it. "You okay, honey?" he asked casually, voice smooth as silk, like the devil wearing a borrowed smile. I forced a light laugh, cursing the way my voice caught. "Just checking emails," I said, praying he couldn't hear the betrayal bleeding into my words. He nodded, too casually, and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, talking about the fence repair like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I watched him from across the room, saw the way he moved, the small flickers of nervous energy he tried to hide, and realized I wasn't living with the man I thought I married anymore. I was living with a stranger, one who had studied me well enough to know how to dismantle my life quietly, methodically, like it was just another project to check off his list. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing while my own thoughts screamed inside my head. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he had whispered. But I did. Oh, I did. And with a fierce, burning clarity, I vowed to myself that I would not let him steal another piece of my life. I would not stay silent. I would not crumble. I would find out everything he was hiding. And when the time came, I would be ready. Robert Henderson thought he was pulling the strings, but he had no idea that the woman he thought he could destroy was already quietly preparing to take back everything he tried to steal. Later that day, after Robert headed outside to fix the fence by the pasture, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the quiet creaking of the old farmhouse pressing down on me. My hands trembled as I opened the laptop again, the screen lighting up my worried face, casting harsh shadows across the room. The numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable, a trail of betrayal hidden in plain sight. Every withdrawal felt like a blow. $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000. Over and over, month after month, money siphoned away with surgical precision. Small enough to stay under the radar, but steady enough to bleed us dry. I felt the sting of anger burning hot behind my eyes, chasing away the part of me that still wanted to believe this could be a misunderstanding. I remembered every birthday we celebrated with homemade cakes because we were saving for our future. Every winter night we huddled together under extra blankets because we chose to fix the roof instead of replacing the old heater. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every hard-won dream we built was now being stolen from under my nose by the man who once promised to protect me. My heart ached with betrayal so deep it made breathing difficult, but I swallowed the emotion down, refusing to let it drown me. I grabbed a notepad from the counter, my fingers stiff and clumsy as I scribbled down every suspicious transaction. Dates, amounts, patterns. There was a pattern, and Robert had been careful, but not careful enough to escape a woman who had built her life piece by piece from the ground up. As I worked, the front door creaked, and panic seized my chest. I slammed the laptop closed, yanked the notepad off the table, and shoved it under a stack of old magazines just as Robert's boots thudded across the floorboards. He wiped his hands on a rag and shot me a curious look, that same easy smile playing on his lips. "Everything good, honey?" he asked, voice warm and syrupy, a dagger hidden in velvet. I forced a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. "Just catching up on some emails," I said, my voice light, my body tense, every nerve screaming to stay calm. He nodded slowly, grabbing a beer from the fridge and leaning against the counter like he had all the time in the world. He talked about the gate repair, about needing to pick up supplies in town, all the normal things a man might say to his wife after a long afternoon of chores. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the desperate need to stay one step ahead. I watched him carefully, memorizing every twitch, every shift of his body. There was something there, something lurking just beneath the surface, something he was working hard to hide. That night, After we turned off the lights and Robert's breathing deepened beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind running circles around itself. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he had said. He thought he had me fooled. He thought I was blind, weak, easily manipulated. But he was wrong. I saw him now, clear as day. And the woman he was underestimating was already 10 steps ahead. I clutched the covers tighter around me, feeling a new strength begin to take root deep inside my chest, cold and steady and unbreakable. Robert Henderson had spent months quietly tearing down the life we built, but he made one fatal mistake. He forgot who he was married to. I had survived loss, hardship, years of clawing our way toward a better life. I wasn't about to let him rip it away without a fight. I would find the truth. I would gather my evidence. And when the time came, he would realize he wasn't the only one capable of playing a long game. Only this time, it would be my move that ended everything he thought he had carefully planned. The screen door creaked open behind me, and I slammed the laptop shut just as Robert stepped into the kitchen, carrying a coil of rope and wearing a look of casual ease that made my skin crawl. He wiped his boots on the mat, gave me a once-over with those sharp blue eyes, and asked, "You okay, honey?" in a tone so sweet it could have rotted the floorboards. I forced a smile so brittle it felt like it might crack my face. "Just checking emails," I said lightly, hoping he couldn't hear the thundering of my heart. He nodded, maybe a fraction too quickly, and turned to rummage through the fridge for a beer. I sat there pretending to scroll through news headlines, pretending not to notice the way his shoulders tightened ever so slightly, pretending that everything was normal when deep down I knew nothing would ever be normal again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced small talk and fake smiles. The television droning on in the background while Robert laughed at sitcoms, and I quietly fought the rising tide of nausea. Every time he looked away, I studied him like a stranger, looking for cracks, for glimpses of the man who used to love me, or at least the man I thought he was. Later, after dinner, Robert got up to take a shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. Face down like it always was these days. My pulse spiked as I stared at it, the temptation almost unbearable. He never left it unattended before, not until recently. I hesitated for only a second before I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I flipped it over just enough to see the screen light up with a notification. My heart nearly stopped. A text message from a name I didn't recognize. Ilya Morrow. I didn't dare open it, but the preview was enough to make my blood run cold. "Just make sure she stays in the dark." Almost there. I pulled my hand back like I had been burned, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. Who was Ilya Morrow? Almost there. Almost where? What were they planning? I heard the water shut off in the bathroom and scrambled to place the phone back exactly where he had left it, my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped it. I sank back onto the couch just as Robert emerged, a towel slung around his neck, ruffling his hair like he didn't have a single guilty thought in his head. "Did you decide on dinner?" he asked, flashing that easy, charming smile. I swallowed hard, the taste of betrayal thick on my tongue. "Not yet," I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. He grabbed his phone without a second glance, scrolling casually, oblivious to the fact that his secrets were already unraveling. I spent the rest of the night staring at the television without seeing a single frame, my mind locked on that message, that name, that chilling phrase. Make sure she stays in the dark. The darkness wasn't outside anymore, it was right here in my home, seated across from me, laughing at a joke on TV while plotting to take everything I had built. That night, as Robert drifted off to sleep beside me, breathing deep and even, I lay awake clutching my pillow, the full weight of his betrayal pressing down on me like 1,000 bricks. I could almost hear the pieces falling into place now, the secret phone calls, the sudden obsession with my finances, the lies that slipped so easily from his lips. He wasn't just thinking about leaving, he was planning to destroy me before he walked out the door. But if he thought I was going to stay blind, to stay broken, to stay quiet, he was dead wrong. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight. And when the time came, Robert Henderson and whoever this Ilya Morrow was would learn the hard way that the woman they underestimated still had plenty of fight left in her. I spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what I had seen, spinning every possibility in my head like a desperate woman clinging to hope, but no matter how I twisted it, nothing about that message was innocent. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a business deal gone wrong, some clumsy mistake that could be explained away with a few words, but deep down, I knew better. The truth sat heavy in my chest, undeniable and suffocating. Robert wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning something far crueler, something that would leave me stripped of everything we had built together. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the steady sound of his breathing, the anger in me began to harden into something sharper, something colder. I had been blind long enough. If he was plotting behind my back, then it was time for me to open my eyes and start thinking like someone who had everything to lose. I turned the conversation over in my mind, picking apart every lie he had fed me lately, every sudden interest in my accounts, every sideways glance when he thought I wasn't looking. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together, and the realization burned so hot in my veins it made my hand shake. He wasn't just going to leave. He wanted to leave with everything. The house, the money, the security I had worked my whole life to build. And he was counting on me to be too trusting, too slow, too broken to stop him. But he had forgotten who he married. I wasn't some naive girl who could be charmed and pushed aside. I had built my life with my bare hands, and I would be damned if I let him steal it out from under me without a fight. The next morning, I woke early, moving carefully so as not to disturb him, and made myself a cup of coffee, my mind already racing ahead. I needed a plan. I needed proof. No emotional outbursts, just cold, undeniable evidence. I pulled out an old notebook from the kitchen drawer, the one I used to use for grocery lists and family schedules back when life felt simple, and I began to write every transaction I had found, every suspicious text, every late-night phone call I could remember. I created a timeline, marking dates and gaps and moments that had made my skin crawl but that I had dismissed at the time as paranoia. I documented everything. I knew the kind of man Robert was: charming, persuasive, skilled at twisting the truth until it suited him, and if this turned into a battle, I needed to be armed with more than just my word. I needed proof. He couldn't talk his way around. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a heavy, wet blanket, but strangely, there was strength in it, too. Every detail I wrote down was another piece of armor, another step toward reclaiming the life he thought he could steal. That evening, Robert acted as if nothing was wrong, making jokes about dinner, asking if I wanted to watch a movie, slipping his arm around my shoulders on the couch like he hadn't already started planning my destruction. I played along, smiling, laughing in the right places, even leaning into his touch. While inside, I was building walls so strong not even he could break them down. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, memorizing his every movement, every careless word, every little tell he didn't even realize he gave away. He thought he was so clever. He thought he was winning. But Robert Henderson didn't realize the woman he was trying to bury was already digging her way out. And when the time came, when the moment was right, I wouldn't just survive what he had planned, I would make sure he regretted ever thinking he could destroy me. The next morning, Robert sat across from me at breakfast, casually scrolling through his phone like he hadn't spent the last few months weaving a web of lies around me. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but it couldn't mask the bitterness rising in my throat. I sipped from my mug, forcing my hands to stay steady, my heart pounding under the surface like a warning drum. Robert glanced up with a disarming smile and said, "Hey, babe, can you sign something real quick?" He slid a stack of papers across the table with the ease of a man offering a grocery list. Not betrayal. I picked them up slowly, my pulse quickening with every turn of the page. Legal jargon flooded my vision. Words about assets, consolidations, protections, but when I reached the final pages, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just a form. It was a property transfer agreement. If I signed everything, our condo, my savings accounts, even the emergency fund I had built over years, would be placed under his name. My fingers gripped the papers tightly as I looked up at him, his smile still plastered on like a mask. "What is this, Robert?" I asked, my voice calm but slicing through the room like a blade. "It's just a precaution," he said with a shrug, taking another sip of coffee. "You know, for legal protection. If anything ever happened to us, it's easier if everything's under one name." He said it so smoothly, so naturally, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. As if he weren't sitting there trying to rob me blind under the guise of love. I stared at him, feeling a surge of emotion so strong it nearly made me dizzy. Rage, betrayal, sorrow. They all collided at once, but I swallowed them down, letting only a cool, measured breath escape. I set the papers back on the table deliberately and folded my hands in my lap. "I'm not signing this," I said, my voice steady and sure. For the first time, I saw the flicker of frustration cross his face, the crack in his carefully maintained facade. His jaw tightened, and he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You really don't want to make this difficult, Margaret," he said, using the tone he reserved for when he thought he could intimidate. But I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, my heart pounding but my spine stiff with resolve. "Is that a threat?" I asked quietly. He leaned back, letting out a short, humorless laugh. But there was no humor in his eyes. Only calculation, only anger. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, as if I were the unreasonable one. As if I were the one tearing our life apart. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. The silence between us was heavier than any argument, filled with all the words we weren't saying. He finally stood up, grabbed his coffee, and walked away, leaving the unsigned papers sitting there like a ticking bomb. As I watched him disappear into the other room, a cold certainty settled over me. He was done pretending. The gloves were off now, and the man I had loved for 27 years was showing his true face. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that I had already moved first. He thought he was cornering me, forcing my hand, but the reality was far different. I was no longer the trusting woman who believed every soft word he whispered. I was no longer the woman who mistook control for care. I had seen the truth, and once you see the truth, you can never go back to pretending. Robert Henderson thought he was playing chess with a woman who didn't know the rules, but he was wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing, and soon enough, he would realize that the game he started was one he could never win. The next morning, I found Robert sitting in the living room, sipping his coffee like it was just another peaceful day. Like he hadn't just tried to steal everything I had built with my own two hands. The sunlight pouring through the window caught the tired lines on his face, but his posture was as confident as ever, as if he believed he still held every card. I sat down across from him, heart steady but guarded, ready for whatever lie he was about to spin. He set his coffee down carefully and exhaled a long breath, like he was about to deliver some difficult but necessary truth. "I think we should separate," he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. The words landed with a dull thud between us. Not a surprise, not a shock, just the confirmation of what I had already known in my gut. I tilted my head slightly, studying him as he tried to maintain the image of a man making a noble, reasonable decision. "It's not working anymore," he continued, shrugging like it was something we both should have seen coming, like it was the weather changing or the seasons shifting. I let a beat pass, letting the weight of his words hang in the air, before I finally spoke. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" I said softly, watching his eyes for any sign of regret, any flicker of the man I once loved. A flash of something, maybe guilt, maybe annoyance, passed over his face. But it was gone before I could name it. "It's for the best, Margaret," he said firmly. "We've grown apart, as if growing apart explained secret withdrawals, forged documents, whispered late-night conversations with strangers." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my voice low and steady. "You mean you want out, but you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed." His jaw tightened, and for a split second, the mask slipped, the anger flashing in his eyes before he pulled it back into something more neutral. He didn't deny it. He didn't even bother pretending. That was all the answer I needed. I could have screamed. I could have hurled accusations, broken every plate in the house, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned back slowly, feeling the strength settle deeper into my bones, and said the words I had been holding on to for this exact moment. I already moved my assets. His entire body stiffened, his breath catching in his throat so sharply I almost heard it. He blinked at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite form the words. "What do you mean?" He finally managed, his voice sharper now, his control slipping. I smiled, slow and deliberate, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction rise in my chest. "Exactly what it sounds like," I said, savoring the look of dawning horror on his face. He leaned back in his chair, gripping the arms so tightly his knuckles turned white, his calm facade crumbling right in front of me. I had outmaneuvered him, and he knew it. For a long moment, we sat there in silence. The only sound the ticking of the old clock on the mantel, marking the end of whatever game he thought he was playing. Finally, he stood up abruptly, grabbing his coffee with unnecessary force. He didn't look at me as he muttered, "You'll regret this, Margaret." I watched him leave the room, feeling the weight of everything he hadn't said hanging behind him like a dark cloud. Maybe I would regret it. Maybe this would get uglier before it got better. But one thing was certain. He had underestimated me for the last time. He thought I would be weak, broken, begging him to stay. Instead, I was stronger than he ever gave me credit for. And now, he was the one scrambling to catch up. Whatever came next, I was ready. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure Robert Henderson never forgot the day he realized he had lost everything he tried to steal. The morning air felt heavier than usual as I moved through my routine, each step weighed down by the memory of Robert's final words to me the day before. I tried to drink my coffee, but it tasted bitter, every sip a grim reminder of the battle I knew was coming. I told myself I wouldn't let him shake me, that his threats were empty bluffs from a man who had already lost more than he could admit. But deep down, a knot of dread had taken hold of my chest and refused to loosen. I was just rinsing out my mug when the sharp, measured knock at the door made me freeze. I wiped my hands on a towel, steeling myself for whatever was waiting on the other side. When I opened it, a man in a navy blazer stood there, his expression unreadable, a thick envelope clutched in his hand. "Margaret Henderson?" he asked in a flat, official tone. I nodded, feeling my heart hammer painfully against my ribs. He handed me the envelope, said, "You've been served," and turned on his heel without another word. I stood there for a moment, clutching the heavy packet in my trembling hands, watching him walk away, feeling the ground tilt slightly beneath my feet. I already knew what it was. Still, I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, to slide a trembling finger under the flap and pull the papers free. The words stared back at me, cold and clinical. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I skimmed the first page, my breath catching as my eyes landed on the financial demands. Robert wasn't just leaving me. He wanted half of everything. The house, the car, the savings I had built brick by brick while he made promises he never intended to keep. And because cruelty seemed to be his new language, he was asking for spousal support, trying to paint himself as the wronged party, the one in need of my money after everything he had done. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh, shaking my head at the audacity of it all. For a long moment, I sat there in the quiet kitchen, sunlight streaming over the betrayal spelled out in black and white, and let myself feel it. Feel the anger, the sorrow, the deep, bone-deep exhaustion of fighting a war I never asked for. But I didn't let it drown me. Not this time. I gathered the papers neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and picked up my phone. I called Patricia, the lawyer I had been referred to months ago when I first started sensing the cracks forming beneath my marriage. Her voice was brisk, but kind as she scheduled me for the afternoon. I spent the next few hours pacing the living room, gathering every document, every scrap of evidence I had carefully hidden away, fortifying myself for the fight ahead. When I walked into Patricia's office later that day, She took one look at the envelope in my hand and smiled grimly. "He made his move," she said, and I nodded, feeling strangely steadier now that it had finally begun. She flipped through the papers quickly, her sharp eyes catching every attempt Robert had made to twist the truth. "He's asking for spousal support?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "After everything you've uncovered?" I shrugged, a tight, humorless smile tugging at my mouth. Apparently, betrayal wasn't enough for him. Patricia leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her desk thoughtfully. "He doesn't have a case. You moved your assets before he filed. You have documented evidence of his financial misconduct. And if he wants a fight, we'll give him one he'll wish he never started." A slow, fierce satisfaction began to bloom in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I felt like I was fighting back. As I left Patricia's office that afternoon, the cool spring air hit my face, and I lifted my chin high. Robert had underestimated me, had counted on fear and heartbreak to keep me silent and weak. But he forgot something important. He forgot who he was dealing with. And I was just getting started. Later that evening, I had just finished pouring myself a glass of wine when the front door slammed open with a force that rattled the windows. I didn't even flinch. I simply turned, glass in hand, and watched as Robert stormed into the house, rage radiating off him like heat from a wildfire. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and his eyes wild with fury. He looked like a man who had just realized the walls he built were crumbling around him. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he spat, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the coolness against my tongue, refusing to let him see even a flicker of fear. "I think I'm finally protecting myself," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle, but the steel underneath it was impossible to miss. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, I wondered if he would actually explode right there in the middle of the living room. "You planned this," he hissed, taking a step closer. I set my glass down carefully on the table and straightened to my full height, meeting his rage with quiet, unbreakable strength. "So did you," I said simply. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, filled with all the betrayal and bitterness that had been festering for months. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his jaw clenching and unclenching as he searched for words strong enough to hurt me. But there were none. Not anymore. Finally, he exhaled sharply, his face twisting into something dark and bitter. "This isn't over," he muttered, and without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply, letting the silence settle over me like a shield. I had won this battle, but I knew better than to think the war was over. Men like Robert didn't walk away quietly. They didn't accept defeat. They regrouped, they strategized, and they came back with something uglier, something crueler. And it didn't take long for his next move to reveal itself. It started at work. First, it was the stares, the lingering looks from coworkers who used to greet me warmly, but now whispered behind cupped hands. Then it was Rachel, my assistant, stepping into my office, her face pale, her hands wringing nervously. "I think you should know," she said hesitantly. "There's a rumor going around. People are saying you stole from your joint accounts, that you laundered money." The words landed like a slap, burning my skin, stealing the air from my lungs. I stared at her, disbelief and rage crashing over me in waves. "I don't believe it," she added quickly, her voice trembling. "But Dean, he's been talking to people, spreading stories." I closed my eyes briefly, swallowing the scream that threatened to tear from my throat. This wasn't just about taking my money anymore. Robert wanted to destroy my reputation, to smear my name so thoroughly that even if I won in court, I would lose everything else. But he underestimated me again. Instead of crumbling, I gathered every rumor, every whisper, every scrap of evidence I could find, and brought it all to Patricia. We sat in her office, a fortress of quiet determination, as she flipped through the printed screenshots and nodded grimly. "He's desperate," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. But if he keeps running his mouth like this, he's opening himself up to defamation charges. A cold, fierce satisfaction lit up inside me. Let him talk. Let him dig his own grave one lie at a time. Because I wasn't just fighting for my house or my money anymore. I was fighting for my name, my dignity, my life. And I wasn't going to lose. I found him at La Rue, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, laughing over drinks with two colleagues as if he didn't have a care in the world. As if he hadn't spent the past few weeks dragging my name through the mud and stabbing me in the back at every opportunity. The sight of him sitting there, relaxed, smug, so sure he had won, made my blood boil with a quiet, burning fury. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't throw a drink in his face or shout across the room, no matter how much the image of doing exactly that danced across my mind. No, I didn't need theatrics. I needed precision. So I crossed the restaurant slowly, heels clicking on the marble floor, my heart hammering hard against my ribs. I walked right up to his table, leaned down between him and his startled companions, and whispered just loud enough for only them to hear. "You have no idea what you've just started." Robert's smirk faltered for the briefest second, his eyes flashing with something dangerously close to fear before he quickly masked it with an arrogant grin. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, leaned back in his chair like he was still in control, and said smoothly, "Let's see what you've got then." I straightened, holding his gaze for a moment longer, letting him see that I wasn't the woman he thought he could destroy. Not anymore. I turned and walked away without another word, leaving him there under the heavy, curious stares of his colleagues, feeling the power shift, feeling it in my bones. It wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It was about survival, about dignity, about reclaiming the pieces of my life he had tried so hard to rip apart. That night, back home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mountains of paperwork Patricia had prepared, the cease and desist letter ready to go, the defamation lawsuit draft sitting heavy in a neat manila folder. Part of me still ached with exhaustion, with the grief of a future I had once imagined with him that now lay in ruins. But a bigger part of me, a fiercer part, felt something else, a cold, clear resolve. I wouldn't just defend myself. I would go on the offensive. Robert had crossed a line, and now he was going to learn that when you try to bury a woman like me, you better make sure she stays buried. And he had failed. I spent the next days gathering everything, screenshots, emails, text messages, financial statements. Patricia and her team built a case so tight, so precise, there was no way for Robert to wriggle free without leaving a trail of blood behind him. I thought about every late night he had spent whispering on the phone, every secret meeting, every sneaky move he had made behind my back, thinking I would never be strong enough to catch him. I thought about every moment I doubted myself, every sleepless night, every tear I cried into my pillow while he plotted to strip away my life. And with every thought, my determination hardened. He had underestimated me for the last time. By the time the paperwork was filed, by the time the first legal letters were delivered, there was no turning back. Robert Henderson wasn't just facing an angry ex-wife anymore. He was facing a woman who had risen from the ashes he tried to leave her in, stronger, smarter, and more relentless than he could ever imagine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing again. Not surviving, not just enduring, truly breathing free, clear, and unbreakable.